So I've got an interesting one for you today, guys, because I want to talk through this case study from PPC company, I suppose they're a PPC software company, Optmyzr, who provide a number of tools to help people manage PPC accounts and find efficiencies. So Navah Hopkins over at Optmyzr, you've probably heard of her before. If you haven't, she's well worth a follow on LinkedIn, so I'll put her profile link in the description of this video. Very good expert in the PPC field. They've basically done a study looking at 17,000 accounts to see whether or not optimization score has an impact on the performance of a campaign. Now, for those of you who don't know what optimization score is, it's a score in percentage terms from 0 to 100 based on how Google predicts your campaigns will succeed. So the higher the score, the more likely Google thinks your campaigns will succeed, but there is one obvious problem with optimization score, and that is that a number of things they suggest that would increase your score aren't mandatory. They're not things that are necessarily going to help your business, but Google says you should do them anyway. For example, running a performance max campaign can quite often add 10% to your optimization score just by taking that one action. Should you run a performance max campaign? Well, like anything, it depends. Some businesses can do very well from it, other businesses shouldn't even think about it. So therefore, that means that 10% gain you could get on your optimization score for running a performance max campaign, it's going to harm some businesses, but it can increase your score. Of course, it can help some businesses as well. And the other part of this as well is if you advertise on the Google partner networks, that can increase your optimization score, and the display network as well, that can increase your optimization score. Again, these two networks are things I typically don't start most campaigns off, especially those with low budgets. I don't use these two networks when running a search campaign on Google. So you can see the conflict of interest and the conflict involved in increasing your optimization score and balancing that with the results of your campaigns. Optmyzr have actually looked at the data behind this, looking at 17,000 accounts. So the theory goes, does optimization score affect Google Ads performance? Interestingly, during GML 2024, Google said that raising your optimization score 10 points leads to a 15% conversion rate improvement. Now, whenever you see a top-level stat like this, you have to ask more questions. How much were these accounts spending? What kinds of industries were they in? Were they running e-commerce? Were they running search campaigns? There's so many different types of question involved behind this data, where there are obviously going to be at the top level, it says there's a 15% conversion improvement, but within that, there are going to be winners and losers on this study. There's going to be people who didn't get results or saw worse results off the back of this as well. So that kind of top level average as well. The question is as well, some of the points of optimization score are just stuff that's obvious. So if you've got conflicting negative keywords holding back your campaigns, if you're doing a lot of things that are very obvious that you should be doing in your account but aren't doing that, then you can increase your optimization score, because by doing so, you're actually doing actions that are positive for your account as well. So that increase of 15% conversions could be somebody who's a complete novice at Google Ads, and a lot of advertisers are complete novices and don't know how to run campaigns. They could increase their optimization score 10 points and see a 15% conversion lift quite easily. Whereas another advertiser who's a seasoned pro who doesn't want to run PMAX, they start running PMAX, get that 10% increase. Maybe they go on the display network and onto partner networks, get another 5% off the back of doing that. They gain 15 points overall, and then they see a decrease in their overall account performance. So that's something to be aware of. So, as mentioned in this study, people can either accept or reject Google's recommendations, because to see your optimization score and to see what impact actions Google is recommending has on your score, you need to go into the recommendations tab within Google Ads. So a lot of advertisers, by the looks of this, don't necessarily like to accept Google's recommendations from that tab. So advertisers can raise optimization score also by dismissing recommendations. So if somebody goes in, sees recommendations, dismisses them, Google actually allows you to increase your score as a result, because it means you've reviewed their recommendations. For whatever reason you rejected them, and Google sees that as, okay, fair enough, we'll let your score maintain or increase. And then the other thing as well is agencies and some freelancers with quite a few accounts, optimization score is tied to partner status, so there's a conflict of interest there as well, which I'll probably discuss in a whole other video, but we'll look at this first. So that's the kind of top level overview of things, but let's look at the data. So As I said, Optmyzr looked at all of the accounts in this study. They looked at 17,380 Google Ads accounts. Now, they had to put some criteria in place to make sure this was a fair sample of accounts, and a large sample it is of that. So each campaign they looked at within this study of these accounts had to be running at least 90 days, spending at least $500 per month, maximum spend of $1 million per month. So there is a cap of some kind in place, even though $1 million a month is, the larger accounts in the system, and global accounts that could be in e-commerce or lead gen. So there's the two types of campaign this study looks at, is e-commerce and lead gen as well. So two very different types of business who can have very different outcomes from some of the suggestions Google makes for recommendations. So let's look at the data. Top level findings of the summary of the data. We'll go on to the diagrams in a second, but let's look at the top level findings, because I think this is super interesting. So 32% of accounts have sub 70 optimization scores. So basically nearly 1 in 3 advertisers doesn't have an optimization score above 70. 19% of accounts achieved an optimization score of over 90 without accepting Google's recommendations. As I mentioned, you can go into Recommendations tab, accept Google's recommendations, or if you don't accept them but you've reviewed them and you reject, then sometimes your score can increase as well. So that's a bit of a caveat to remember in this study. 5.5%, so less than 1,000 accounts out of that 17,000 accounts they're looking at, accepted Google's recommendations. However, the best performance belongs to the 333 accounts that accepted Google's suggestions and have a 90 to 100 optimization score. That's nuts, because this basically means that people who go into the Recommendations tab basically accept everything as Google is telling them. They have a really high optimization score. These accounts see the best performance. That 90 to 100 optimization score right at the top of the tree with the highest score. This study is saying that it's been seen that these accounts have a higher optimization score. Now, I mentioned spend earlier. Spend doesn't really impact optimization score. There's too much fluctuation in the spends to point to any correlation or causation. So spend isn't a factor. I mentioned at the beginning of this video it might be. By the looks of things, it's not. So this final point, there is a correlation between higher optimization scores of 80 plus and improved CPA, conversion rate, though sub 70 did win this category, and ROAS. There's no correlation between CPC and CTR. So what we're going to look at is the table of data, because I think this will explain things better, and I have a theory as to why some of these differences are so stark. So you can see here, optimization scores of under 70 see the highest CPCs of the accounts they sampled. So let's start off with that CPCs column. Higher CPCs with a lower optimization score kind of makes sense. And the reason I say that is because when you think about what Google wants to do with optimization score, there are three major changes you can make to an account to increase your optimization score that will massively lower your CPCs. Number one, running performance max campaigns. They go across all of Google's inventory, not just search, which is the highest competition inventory, going onto display and other areas of YouTube's whole ad platform. That's going to lower your CPCs. You're going to get a bunch of display clicks, a bunch of video clicks, all sorts. So that's going to lower your CPCs. Joining the display network, of course, is going to lower your CPCs. And finally, if you go into the search partners as well, which is another indicator of a higher optimization score, that is going to lower your CPCs as well. This all makes perfect sense. Even though, so basically, having a lower optimization score sees higher CPCs is in red here. I'm just guessing this is how they've, custom, correlated the fields to make them go red if they're seen as bad, or green if they're good, or whatever, or the highest or lowest. But ultimately, this isn't worrying, even though it shows that CPCs are lower with a higher optimization score. It's all about the quality of traffic. So if you are seeing higher CPCs with a lower optimization score, it doesn't mean, oh my god, I need to implement all of my recommendations to lower my CPC. You need to think about those recommendations. Are they going to be helpful for your business? And is Performance Max Display Network and Partner Networks going to help you? In a lot of cases, no. In a lot of lead gen businesses, it's not. In some e-commerce businesses, then yeah, you want to do a Performance Max campaign. Of course you do. So that's the question you need to ask yourself. Next is click-through rate. So we can see optimization scores of 70 to 80 have the higher click-through rate, and then anything above that starts to tail off a little bit more. In fact, Highest scores mean lower click-through rates. As you can see here, same reasoning for that is the same as the CPCs. You're going to get lower click-through rates on display advertising. If somebody's looking for something and they're on Google and they go in and they actually look for what they're looking for, they're going to click your ad more frequently than those who are just browsing the internet, going through YouTube, looking on their phone at the Discovery panel or whatever it is on an Android device. They're going to be clicking your ad a lot less because they're not actually looking for the thing you're promoting. It's more passive. That kind of makes a lot more sense. Now we get to the really interesting column. This next column is the most interesting one to me, and I think it tells quite a big story. So, conversion rate. Under 70% optimization score has the highest conversion rate. And then when you get to 90 to 100, it's the second highest. But when you look at the difference between the highest and second highest, I know it's only like 1 point something percent, but in actual percentage change terms, it's quite significant. So when you look at this data, you see the lowest optimization scores have the highest conversion rates. What does that mean? For me, looking at this, it means that businesses with low optimization scores are ones that, first of all, do not take on Google's recommendations. They're running very tight campaigns. Maybe they're not spending as much as some of the big players, but ultimately they're controlling their campaign way more than Google would like them to ultimately. But the outcome of that is that they have a higher conversion rate because they're controlling the traffic quality. They're going to get less performance max traffic. They're going to get less traffic from display. They're going to get less traffic from partner networks. All of these factors mean that essentially you're going to get a higher conversion rate, and that's what most businesses actually want. I speak to a lot of businesses, and those at the very tippity top who are scaling, getting big, they want to get as many conversions as possible to show growth to investors. They want to have the volume. They don't necessarily want to have the massively high conversion rate. They need volume of sales. So that's not necessarily the tactic for them. But for most small businesses I speak to, they want a tight campaign with a strong conversion rate, with a reliable source of leads to help them grow their small business. And that's why for me this isn't a surprise. Seeing under 70% having the highest conversion rate is no surprise to me whatsoever. But the other side of the question is, okay, so 90 to 100% is in position 2. Surely if my logic followed, then those who are in 70 to 80 have a bit less control, have a bit more control, but not as much as people in the 70 and below. And those 80 to 90, again, they haven't accepted everything, but they've got something in place. So why is it that the 90% to 100% optimization scores are second place in this list? And I think because the reason is, some accounts do benefit from that wide scope. You know, if you've got a big business spending a lot of money and you're promoting your products and services across everything and you're looking for that growth and scalability, by doing the things Google's saying in the recommendations tab, you are going to get a lot more scale. And I think you can increase your conversions as well when you get to that level. So I think there's two dichotomies here. I have a feeling these are two different types of business in terms of the conversion rate. The next two columns are interesting though. So CPA is lowest on a 90 to 100 optimization score, and it's highest on a 70 and below. Again, when you look at data this size and you don't necessarily have the individual niche stats to back everything up, you kind of have to make some assumptions in some cases. Now, I think that the reason the CPA is higher in the lower optimization score part and lower in the 90 to 100 is of course going to be down to network choice again in terms of Google search versus display and performance max. That's going to be part of it. Higher CPCs can increase your cost per conversion, but also I've got a feeling industries make a difference to this as well. If your CPA is higher than someone who's got a high optimization score, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should be trying to get a lower CPA, because it might mean the changes you make to your campaign to do that mean the quality of lead drops off. Maybe you're branching your traffic out more. Maybe you're using broad match when you shouldn't do. Broad match provides cheaper traffic than exact match. So these are the kind of things you need to look into, is the cost of traffic. Now, naturally, with a lower optimization score, you're going to be having more expensive traffic, so a higher CPA does make sense. But when you contrast that with the conversion rate, it's probably a trade-off a lot of businesses would be looking to make. However, things get more interesting on this final column when you look at return on advertising spend. The higher the optimization score, the higher the ROAS, and that basically tracks from the very lowest point from 70 and below all the way through to the highest point. You go from 276 to 422, then 442, then 515. So it does look like the higher the optimization score, the higher the ROAS. But one caveat in this, People with low optimization scores probably miss out on some points for not tracking revenue values. Tracking value of conversion is a factor in optimization scores, so those businesses who are tracking values will have a higher optimization score by virtue of the fact they are just sending values data in their conversions. So what does that mean? What it means is those businesses who are tracking values are probably much more savvy businesses, those who are much more able to track conversions more successfully. And again, this is a split between e-commerce and lead gen. With a lot of lead gen businesses, tracking conversion value isn't seen as important, whereas obviously on e-commerce, it's massively important. So by virtue of tracking conversion value on, say, an e-commerce business, you're going to get a higher optimization score. Those businesses will probably be bidding towards a ROAS target. So it makes sense. If you're bidding towards a ROAS target because you're tracking values, value being tracked in the account is an optimization score factor. When you tie that together, it makes sense that those businesses will have a higher ROAS. Those businesses with 70 and under probably aren't even necessarily all tracking value, and if they are tracking value, they probably default it to the $1 per conversion value. So the value in the account probably means nothing. All they care about is this conversion rate and their CPA and the conversion of lead to sale in their business. That's a big difference compared to an e-commerce business focused on value. So that's, for me, is a big difference. So as you go through the study, you actually get to see a bit more of infographics here. It's a very interesting study. I won't go through all of it now. I've gone through the main part I want to go through, which is, of course, that graph. I'm going to link the study down below, but I think it's a very interesting study. I think you should definitely have a read through it. But those are my thoughts, basically. I think that optimization score overall, and I think this article comes to a very similar conclusion to me. And it's that basically optimization score is something you need to be aware of, especially if you're an agency and you have an agency status to keep in terms of a partner status. But ultimately, you need to focus on your campaigns. If you're in the group where you want just maximizing your conversion rate and you don't care necessarily about scaling outside of having a higher cost per conversion, then you keep your campaigns tight, you keep the management tight, you don't accept all of Google's recommendations. But if you are in a position where your business could benefit from optimization score recommendations, then you should probably look at testing those out to see if they work for you. So here's the final summary and takeaway from Optmyzr, and I pretty much agree with what it says. Even though this data is interesting, they come to a very similar conclusion to me. Optimization score is not and should never be a KPI. Agree, it shouldn't be a KPI. Anyone at Google phoning you up and saying you need a higher optimization score is just, you know, they're misleading you completely. It's a useful tool to focus work, which means, yes, if something is raised in your recommendations, you can see what work could or should be done, though it should not be the only tool you use. Make sure you balance all recommendations from Google with the actions and optimizations that best serve your campaigns and business. That final sentence is the most important sentence of this summary. Do what's right for your business. Don't do what's right for Google, even though this study has found that higher optimization scores correlate with a lot of positive account performance metrics. As you know, as I've explained in this video, there is devil in the detail, and if you go under the hood of this study, I'm sure you'll find loads of correlations between industries, between types of businesses, sizes of business. It would be really interesting if they did a follow-up article to this, going into that detail by niche, by size, and looking at all of those different factors and then pulling the data from that, especially campaign type as well, in terms of shopping, performance max, search, and all those kinds of things as well. But with that said, they've come to the same conclusion. But let me know what you think. Do you guys care at all about optimization score, or is it seen as a vanity metric? Let me know in the comments below. I replied to pretty much every comment on all of my videos. Like this video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. Check out the content across the channel, and I'll see you guys on my next video.